He's Howard Eibach, former copywriter and creative director, and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about advertising, creative briefs, and briefing. Henry, we have Uri Baruchin back for a second time to continue the conversation we started a couple weeks ago. Let's join the conversation. Let me see if I understand you. Are you saying, I mean, I haven't listened to this interview or read the transcript of the interview with Biba about, was the originator of this get who to buy, was it his or her objective to create a workable template for a creative brief, or was there some other objective?
I think they were trying to find something that can sit as a shorthand, because shorthands are useful, right? 3-word brief. Shorthands are useful. I want my team to have a broader understanding of everything, but it's very, very useful to have some sort of a heart, North Star, core, kernel, whatever you call it, right? Whatever is your chosen metaphor system for it, that people can use themselves as they go through the process to kind of like sense check themselves and remind themselves, this is what we're trying to do. And that can sometimes be 3 words. I'm okay with that. Or it can be an SMP.
I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 examples of creative briefs on the Creative Brief archive, many of which came from Biba's Creative Brief. Creative Brief. I forget what she calls it.
I think.
Right.
Creative Brief. Yes,
and in
Creative
none of
Brief
those
band.
cases, the get who to buy makes any sense for you as
well. I don't think I've seen
creative.
it. I don't think I've seen one. I don't think there are any briefs among that collection.
So
between the two of us.
I mean, you could blame me that I am. I think it's known as the no true Scotsman fallacy, where you basically say, oh no, but actually, if you use it properly, then it'll be wonderful. But
that was my next question: have you seen it? I mean, someone has to have done it well. Are there many examples?
For it to work, you need every step of the way to be strategic, right? You need to get to be a strategically chosen audience. You need the who to have insight. You need the to be a very smartly chosen behavior change, right? And yes, behavior change is sometimes purely about awareness, but quite often agencies are trying to get more sophisticated behavioral changes than that. And finally, for me as a strategist, the most important thing is the buy, right? BY, the how to win. How are we going to win this? What do we think is the one lever that if we kind of use that as a leverage, that leads to the audience getting it and hopefully shifting their behavior in the way we're trying to shift it. Now, for you, Howard, you usually use an SMP to articulate that's the lever, right? Hoffman uses his 3-word brief to do that. It's right there within the framework. It's just that it doesn't seem to be practiced correctly almost anywhere. And, I'm not saying there aren't smart people working in agencies. I'm not saying there aren't smart people working client side. I work with people day in, day out, but somehow those things get lost in the, in the mess that is lack of time and resource and politics.
I think
what the thing. Oh, sorry. I mean, that is an aside, but it will illustrate my point. You know what is the one thing that worries me most about using AI in strategy?
What? Besides that, it tends to hallucinate.
Well, we can actually talk about that. I mean, do we have time? We don't have time. We don't have time. Yeah, it's I mean, I actually think that I'm worried less about hallucinations than I'm worried about drift, because drift is much harder to identify than the confabulations. But that's something else. What worries me most is when I started my career, and I'm going to name some names, right? Aaron Shields, Gillian Shields, Ian Rowe, Ron Yachini. These are just some of the people that worked with me closely and gave me so much of their time, right? I got so much wisdom and experience from those people. Jonathan Hashkes, I gotta mention him as well. You know, I don't think any of those names are recognizable to anyone listening unless they work for Landor Fitch, because Aaron Shields is one of the heads of strategy at Landor today. Sorry, they now got rid of the Fitch. We mentioned last time, WPP makes sure that it destroys as much equity as possible in its holding companies. That's how it works. It's now just Landor. So you know, and CEOs I work with, I got so much time and attention early in my career. And those names are largely from the first years of my career, right? So all the way almost like to the middle of my career. I got so much time and attention. And now I don't think it happens as much anymore. I don't think there's training on the job. I don't think there's workshop on the job as much as it used to. So you have juniors that are now going to work with those AI tools, finding it quite hard to know what's true, what isn't true, what's good, what's banal, because those engines are very good at creating the obvious. And the obvious is, most of the time in our business, is useful in order to get it out of the way and get to the more interesting stuff. Or understand that this is the obvious and we need to find the twist that makes it a little bit more sharp.
Rob Schwartz was a guest on our show some time ago. Rob is my former boss when I was at Team One. You know, he's now coaching at TPWA Chiat Day and all the companies that are affiliated with it. And he said he thought one of the problems of strategy today is that strategists no longer have heroes.
I mean, where will the next generation come from?
Yeah. Creatives are constantly talking about the people who influenced us. And when a legend passes, they talk about the conversations that they had with this person while he or she was alive. And I'm hearing that coming from you. You're talking about people that, you know, I haven't heard of. I don't know if Henry's heard of them.
No, those are my personal mentors. So I'm lamenting the loss of mentorship. I do think that heroes, I mean, I try to hero some people, right? So when I talk about Rumelt or when I talk about Binet and Carter or Binet and Field, it's the same Binet, of course.
Yeah, Les Binet.
And when I talk about those people and I say, follow them, listen to them, you know, I mean, even and contrarians like Bob Hoffman or Mark Ritson, or because those people have good things to say. I don't think the problem is as much as with heroes, although there are some really undeserved heroes as well that have damaged our industry greatly.
Let's hear the names.
No, not so late into the conversation. It's the lack of mentorship and the lack of time for seniors to pay attention, because I think in creative teams it still works. I think in the relationship between creative directors and their juniors, it still works much more than it works in the relationship between head of strategy directors and their juniors.
I think
and especially when those juniors start working with AI, I'm like, where's the practice? How will they learn?
I think the middle of the pyramid in strategy departments has been hollowed out. So you have a leader and he's overseeing a bunch of juniors. And so I don't know that there's a lot of places that have, you know, strategists in the middle of the pyramid with 5-6 years of experience. They're not, you know, people with 15-20 years. We got a lot of 1 or 2 year people answering to a 20-year veteran.
It's worse than that. I mean, right now it's worse than that, because there's one of the things that have happened to me during my career is I've gone through a series of market crises. Right, I've been through the dot-com burst. I've been through the credit crunch. You know, and to a degree, there's now, you know, times are difficult for agencies over the last 2 years. and the year is still too young to know where it's going. But what happens through those crises is the following, right? Because our industry is the canary in the mine, right? We're the first budget to get cut. And ironically, and English doesn't have an idiom for that, as far as I know, we're the last to recover, right? When that happens in agencies, especially medium-sized and bigger agencies, the first thing that happens is the following. First, you see who can you cut from your seniors because they are more expensive. And that way you're losing a tremendous amount of knowledge of and experience just bleeds out of the industry. And because the industry is extremely ageist, a lot of those people go freelance.
They'll never work
they
again.
never come back because they don't get hired. They don't get hired. In London, I think there's 3.5 people over 50 in agencies.
Average?
3.5% average.
Oh. That's terrible. But I mean, that's common.
Terrible. That's terrible. Now, so first you get rid of that because you have no other option as a business owner. You got to cut your budgets. So you have to lose some of the people who earn more. So now your senior leadership is even less people with less time, and they are more time poor. Now, what do you do in the middle? You take from the lower bracket, you notice some of your bright sparks, and you promote them, and you give them a very small rise because times are hard. Maybe you don't give them a raise at all, but you give them a new fancy title. One of the things that are clear to me is what used to be called, what used to be called a senior strategist or a senior planner in the noughties, nowadays they are a strategy director. That would be their title, right? So
well, we see that proliferation in the account services side too. Like it used to be an account executive was a big deal. It was the person that ran the business. Now you have to be some sort of group account director, in order
client
to,
director.
like we have this proliferation of titles.
The word account itself in many agencies is now junior by definition, because if you're more senior, you're a client executive, a client
or a brand,
rather than an account director.
Yeah. It's that's one of the beefs that I have, is this ever-changing vocabulary of and proliferation of titles. And I think a lot of it has to do with what you're saying, is like, I need to give this person a promotion, so I have to give them some sort of title that makes them feel important. So every title now is more important. Like I said, an account exec, in the Mad Men days, an account executive was the person who ran the account. Like that was, now an account executive is like the lowest rung on the account totem pole.
It's like a form of junior project management, sometimes bordering on a PA.
Yes.
Terrible. It's sad. It's not good for anyone's career or business.
What's your...
I didn't want to end up in such a sad, kind of like pessimistic place.
Well, no, this is an opportunity for you to prognosticate. Where do you, are you hopeful? Are you hopeful for things? Where do you think we're going? Where should we go?
I am hopeful, but I actually think that maybe in order for some of the things to change, some big disruptions will have to happen. So, if I think of scenarios that are relatively positive, a lot of them are scenarios that include a lot of pain. In the sense, like growth pains. I mean, like
creative destruction.
Yeah, creative destruction. So,
but aren't we the industry that claims to, be the advocates for disruption?
Yeah. No. So, I can say some of the things that might happen. First, I think that a lot of interesting things are happening with in-house agencies and in-house creative teams. Now, that's a trend that is incredibly painful for agencies in the traditional model, but not necessarily painful for creative teams and strategy teams that I've seen some of those absolutely flourish under those constellations. There's a lot to lose from, you know, knowing other sectors and what it's like in other sectors and that kind of thing. And also there's a whole load of challenges that, by the way, I've through my work with the DNAD, I've done some corporate training that is all about getting the marketing team to communicate with our in-house creative team through brief writing, by the way, Howard.
I know.
I'm not
I do
ashamed to
this.
say.
I do the same.
Among other
Yeah.
things, because they discover how complicated the relationship becomes when you're no longer a client to your agency, but a colleague to your agency. So they're actually discovering some of the dynamics that agencies have known about for years and have some really creative ways of resolving. So that is one optimistic route. I think interesting things will happen in-house. I think interesting thing, again, I'm going to describe a painful thing. Taking away the strategy from your agency and giving it to a more pure strategy player, whether it's a consultant, whether it's a pure strategy house consultancy, and there are some of those, because if you think about it, if the answer is always an ad, something is already wrong with the strategic process to begin with. Because that's not how strategy works. That's not how problem solving works. You cannot assume the solution, right? And actually, one of the most beautiful ideas that I was planning to mention and didn't mention is what's known as the inventor's paradox, not the innovator's paradox. The inventor's paradox is the paradox that says that actually the more ambitious plan that relates to a more broader context quite often creates the more successful solution. Dove is a case in point if you think about it, right? They went broad context rather than something.
Yes.
But anyway, so I think that's something that might happen in some cases, or maybe taking the creative strategy even in-house, and then agencies become craft people and production houses sometimes. A lot of those things are very painful because they include businesses closing and people losing their jobs.
I
Skills and the talent will be needed elsewhere, and that's kind of like keeps me a little bit more optimistic. What I'm not optimistic about, what I'm less optimistic about, is the amount of money that has been eaten by big tech and is not coming back. So we're going to have to stay lean and mean on many levels. And another thing is how in love so many CEOs are with the largely false promise that AI means that they can have much smaller teams, because that's not how those things scale. That's not the way they scale, but we're not going to have time to talk about that. So yeah, so I have a lot of thought leadership around AI, and I think that some of the ways those things scale is not the way others think.
So they should look for you on LinkedIn. Is that the best place to find those writings?
Well, if people are interested about my thinking, yeah, on LinkedIn, there's a lot of my thinking, but honestly, the best way is to work with me.
Okay.
Let's work together. And honestly, there's this, I mean, I am not sure. I mean, I've been independent now for 5 years. I am dying to find the right home. I just want one team that I can cultivate. It just seems like more practical. And we'll see.
You were talking about the things that could potentially happen in the industry. I mean, I don't see it as beyond credulity that one of these mega advertising conglomerates collapses and basically puts a big chunk of the.
I think consolidated with one of the big consultancies is probably more likely. So I mean, we've said it for many years now, but I think like an Accenture is likely to buy one of the big networks at some point, and there already is consolidation, right? There's the mega merger happening
Yeah, I guess what I'm
The
saying
mega
is
merger that is happening. Consolidation doesn't happen in markets that are growing quite often. I mean, there are two types of consolidation. I wrote about that as well. But like the consolidation we're seeing now is consolidation for hunkering down, for, you know, for preparing for tough times. That's the consolidation we're seeing. I mean, they're going to talk to the shareholders about the growth opportunities and synergy until tomorrow. Those things are not happening because things are swell at the moment.
gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. But good talent will still be required. And what people need to do is to become smarter and better at what they do. And they need to look at the new models that are emerging and go to the pockets of growth that still exist. You're not going to change the market as a single person, right? So what can you do? You can level up yourself. You can become better at what you do. And you can look out there and identify the handful of places that somehow magically seem to avoid some of the pain and are still growing and doing great and interesting things.
I would add to that also for young people out there in the business, particularly in our field of strategy, that there's a wealth of knowledge out there. Some part of what we were talking about earlier was, how these frameworks and these brief templates, they get passed down without any real
Yeah.
understanding of how they work, why they were created. And I think that often overlooked is the fact that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and a lot
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
stuff, a lot of the stuff that was put out there in the early days of strategy is still as relevant today. And I think there's a generation of strategists that just kind of
Yeah.
skipped over that.
So to them, I would say, find those giants. And when you see a new tool or new framework, go down that rabbit hole, discover where it came from, discover the fundamental ideas that are driving all those different frameworks. Not all of them are bad. A lot of them are bad. The newer ones when it comes to brand identity definition, for example. But if you can understand the fundamental ideas, which is what I have tried doing with my work, right? My work quite often is all about, let's boil it to what are the fundamental paradigms here and create a strategist. I'm not even, I'm not in the business of just creating strategists. I'm in the business of creating strategic people, right? Strategic thinkers. So you create the kind of strategic thinker that can look at one of those framework and either go, oh, I see what they're trying to do here, right? Not saying this is bad, this is good, this works, this doesn't work, but actually saying, I see what they're trying to do here. I see what about this can work and what is more problematic, and I can navigate that, and I can work with anything. I can work with anything. At this very moment, as we speak, a current project I'm on, archetypes are one of the central ideas to the framework. And as we mentioned last time, I've been very critical of that idea, and I think that a lot of times it's used wrong. But I'm working with it. I'm working with it by basically saying, okay, let's agree what we can do with archetypes and what we can't do with archetypes. Let's remember where those things come from and where they work, and let's work with that. And so far, one of the most beautiful client relationships I've had in recent memory.
One of the 5 ingredients that I listed in my book on the single-minded propositions was brand archetypes. And when I wrote that book, it made complete sense because in the conversations I had with a number of strategists all around the planet, that was one of the things that they talked about.
Oh, it's still hugely popular. It's still hugely popular, but
exactly. And I have since cooled on it without realizing your perceptions of it, I've cooled on it as well. But
it's a tool for exploring. It's a tool for exploring personality. Nothing beyond that. For me,
I have the
same
I have the same attitude, probably maybe more emphatic attitude toward personas. which I think are often merely a collection of tidbits of information about a person that doesn't add up to anything real.
You know what? But that actually, I'm going to just in a nutshell. So a couple of years ago, an agency I was working with hired me and said, we need personas. And I was like you, I was already kind of at best agnostic about personas, if not extremely skeptic. And I was like, really? You want me to do personas? Why? And they said, well, we already sold it. It's part of the proposal to the client. And that kind of forced me to reinvent personas a little bit. And I have to tell you that actually at best, personas nowadays, it's basically storytelling with data, which is what I did. It's a wonderful way to keep the actual audience in mind, even though it's not an actual audience, because it's impossible. But you can actually use them as tools for storytelling with data in a way that is really, really quite fascinating. But
You've reframed it.
again,
You've reframed it.
I
Which makes
reframed
it
it.
which makes it more impressive.
I had to reinvent it, and I've used it a couple of times since successfully. Although when I sell a project, unless it's absolutely necessary, because I feel here I have a client that doesn't have this gut feeling of who those people are, then maybe I will introduce it into the process. But most of the time, I choose not to use that tool.
Yeah, I encounter clients, marketers and for their brands who simply don't understand or have a clue who their customers are.
Yeah,
And
well,
they use the tool of a persona again to collect tidbits. I keep coming back to the same word. So I love the way that you've reframed it, which means that if you're going to use this, in the future, you have to retrain people on how to
yeah.
go about using that as a
Yeah,
call it a
I agree
framework.
with you, because quite often it's a persona is an edit of the thing we wished our audience would be and would do, because it would be easier for us as a brand to sell to them if this is who they were. It's kind of like a wishful thinking framework quite often. I think that's the issue.
Let's turn our attention to the work that you've done with AD&D, or I'm sorry, DA&D, and some of the training that you've done with SCA. What are some of the things that you enjoy most, or maybe let me
Oh,
reframe it.
right. Well, okay, let's
what
frame that, because again, the educator aspect of me, that's the side hustle, right? In a good year, that takes me 10 to 15% towards my break-even point as a business, right? So first, let's remember that. What I like doing most is working with clients and working with agencies. That's what I
but
like doing.
and I get it, but as we've already talked about, and Henry and I have had many a show about the dearth of training in our industry. One of the things that I love doing when I talk to students, and I never
Okay.
charge a penny I don't charge a penny for this. I just do it because I
Yeah.
love doing it.
Yeah.
What are some of the interesting situations that you've encountered when you teach young minds? What are the challenges that you face? Are there frustrations that you encounter with young people coming into this industry?
Um, I don't find it frustrating. I find great joy in it, to be honest. Um, I think they get it. I think the beauty, again, I mentioned it before, it's not rocket science. The beauty of the most fundamental paradigmatic ideas of our discipline is that you can teach them in 5-10 minutes, and then it takes a lifetime to master them. Right? And yes, you can teach them with more nuance, with more meta understanding. Those things are very useful, with a little bit more criticism against some of the misleading ideas that are out there. But for me, what I enjoy is keeping the pure simplicity of fundamental strategic ideas alive. I mentioned that idea of, that paraphrase of a quote from Rumelt, but actually Sun Tzu writes about it in Art of War, right? Strong against weak. it's such a beautiful, simple concept. And that concept is behind such a massive percent of the actual good strategic ideas out there, right? You identify a weakness in the market or an overseen opportunity in the market, and you take something that you can do well or a strength, and you apply that strength to that weakness. It's as simple as poetry, honestly. It's not
Well,
a
I'm
complicated
not sure.
philosophy.
I'm not sure I would agree that poetry is simple, but
Well, I said as simple as poetry. I didn't say poetry was simple. That is a different thing
okay.
to say.
All right.
Right? It's
As
in the
simple
way
as,
that poetry is simple.
okay. I get that. Yes. So as simple as the poem makes the idea, makes the emotion seen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The complex is accessible, right? The complex is accessible. And by the way, we are now in a world of mounting complexity, but really fascinating new ways of accessing that complexity.
All right. I want to go back to something you said, I think within the first
I keep
5 minutes.
saying things that will sound good as a final thought, but
No,
keep going. I have
I want to
time.
keep going here.
I have as much time as you as you have, but you know.
And I have more time than Henry does, but when
Yeah.
Henry will have to sign off when he has to sign off. But you said something in the first 5 minutes of our initial conversation a couple of weeks ago, and you brushed past it very quickly, and I want to
Oh
come
God,
back
I
to
made a
it
promise
because,
and I didn't keep it. Okay.
well, you brought up the topic of semiotics,
Right.
and I studied that a little bit when I was in graduate school, and
Yeah.
as someone who
Well,
likes to write, if I understand it, semiotics is this. You tell us what your understanding of semiotics is and
okay.
and how it
I'm
applies
gonna
to strategy.
offer a heuristic definition of semiotics. A simple definition would be to think about semiotics as the study of meaning and meaning systems and how we both understand those meanings and construct those meanings. Um, I have a lot of semiotics in my academic background before I dropped out of a PhD program in order to be in marketing in my mid-20s. And I find it an incredibly useful body of knowledge, because if you're in a because of of the phenomena that is known as kind of like meaningful consumption and those kind of things, but like the way markets work and the way marketing works is identifying needs and identifying patterns and then creating meanings that influence those patterns. So almost in all my projects there's always an element of semiotics where I try to see what are the prevalent kind of like systems of meanings driven by signs and the way signs work in a category, in a market, among an audience, etc., and trying to both understand what makes those things tick and then both deconstruct them and reconstruct them is one of the most fascinating things. And it's incredibly important when you look at the communication side of things, then it's absolutely priceless. But it actually, on a more abstract strategic level, it actually goes into the full 4Ps of marketing, if you will. And also the overall relationship, right? Because at the end of the day, we are in a business where people talk to people. All businesses are people talking to people and trying to agree about things and about what things mean and how to get somewhere with that understanding.
Well, this is an example of three brief and writing nerds getting together and really getting lost in the rabbit hole. I personally
Yeah, I
love this.
mean,
This is a fascinating topic because it really gets to the heart of putting yourself in the shoes of someone you're trying to talk to.
yeah,
Try to understand these levels of meanings.
yeah.
Um, how has that influenced the way you write a brief?
Semiotics.
Yeah.
Well, it simply influences both the understanding of the market, the audience, category conventions, for example, is one area where semiotics are extremely important. And then when it goes into the brief, it's kind of like the decision, okay, now when we are reconstructing where our brand is, what our brand says, how our brand behaves, how do we leverage the learnings from our semiotic understanding of that space into the right kind of like the right cues and the right messages and the right behaviors that are going to create the difference we're trying to create in the market. So that is largely how it will influence how I write a brief.
What do creatives think about your briefs, Uri? Have you heard from them? Have
Well,
they
I mean,
told
I
you
only
what they
know
think?
what they say to my face. First, I mean, I have to mention that quite often I write and rewrite the briefs collaboratively with the creatives. For me, that's one of the most magical things you can do for a brief.
Music to my ears.
And I've had many moments that I love where, I come with a specific metaphor for the strategy and the creatives change the metaphor to a better metaphor, and that makes me realize that this actually also focuses the strategy. So I take a step back and I improve the strategy to fit the better metaphor. But that is cross-pollination, right? That is the real magic of collaborating with creatives, right? If I didn't like collaborating with creatives, I would have probably gone into business management consulting. But I love working with creatives, and I like the output of our work, and I like the weirdness of the problems we deal with and the weirdness of the solutions we find for those problems.
As the creative amongst the three of us, I would say the answer that I was looking for is kind of between the lines, but it is, as a creative, I would love to work with you. I would love to work with both. I mean, it's too bad I'm no longer in the actual industry because I'm sitting here with two strategists that I would love to work with, based on the way you go about the process.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, who knows? Who knows, Howard?
Any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up, Uri?
Oh God, no. I mean, I think I've talked plenty. I think the final message would be to the next generation is, find those growth areas, those growth pockets, try going into them, and don't settle for superficiality. Go deep in your work, go deep in your exploration. It will make your work life more fulfilling, and it will save you time later. I know you don't have time now, but all those things will actually make your work life also easier and more time saving. I don't know if that's a good pitch or not, but
I think it is.
I
Thank you
do
so
too.
much.
Yeah, and when we bring you back a third time, I'm going to ask you about your obsession with triangles.
right, yeah, of course.
Uri
Next time,
Baruchin,
something for next time.
yes, Uri Baruchin, consulting strategist, talking to us from London, coming back. We appreciate you coming back again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.